So welcome to the Natural Areas Association 2022 webinar series. I'm Maura McGinty-Kloss. I'm Director of Programs and Communications for NAA, and I'm delighted that you're joining us today. The purpose of our webinars is not just to convey information, but to engage natural areas professionals on topics of interest, highlighting emerging science methodologies and best practices. So we encourage you to be engaged in this webinar, post your questions, comments, and chat. And we invite you, if you have additional resources, please share them. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for underwriting this event, the Bureau of Land Management. Because of their underwriting, we're able to make more programs possible. So for those of you who don't know us or are new to this program, the Natural Areas Association is a national nonprofit. We serve practitioners who manage ecologically significant landscapes to protect biodiversity. We contend that protecting natural areas in perpetuity requires quality science to inform practices and access to reliable resources. NAA provides science-based content for natural areas practitioners and researchers seeking applied science, practical solutions, and knowledge transfer related to the management of natural areas. And we serve sectors, all the sectors, including the state agencies that house natural areas programs, as well as parks, forestry programs, land trusts, regional agencies, and federal land management agencies. We offer a suite of programs, including webinars like these. One of the things we also do is publish our Natural Areas Journal. We curate and share relevant and timely programs with practitioners through the Natural Areas Journal. This is original research, and it's peer-reviewed and published 4 times a year. The July issue just came out, so please feel free to go to our website, naturalareas.org, and check it out. I also want to tell you just a little bit about our Natural Areas Conference. It's coming up on September 6th through 9, 2022. We're delighted that Robin Wall-Kimmerer will be a keynote speaker, as well as we have over 100 breakout sessions, roundtables, posters, field workshops, and hands-on workshops. We will be in person. We were just in Duluth. It's beautiful there, so we hope you're able to join us. Oh, and the early bird ends Friday. So if you're thinking about it, it's a good time to register because you will save money. Also at this event, the USDA Forest Service will be sponsoring a hiring event. It will be both in person as well as virtual. They are going to be on hand. They will help you with applications, jobs, whatever, any sort of career advice that they can offer at the time. But it's a great opportunity to talk one-on-one with the people that hire at the Forest Service. And I also just want to mention that we will be having the State Natural Areas Program in-person roundtable at the conference. This is a great opportunity for people who manage state natural areas and heritage programs to get together in person and talk about their challenges, their successes, and sometimes just the things that get them down. It's just a great opportunity to support each other. We will be asking for pre-recorded reports. They're quick and easy, 5 to 7 minutes. I'm here to help you if you want to do a pre-recorded report about your state. So we hope that those of you who are coming to the conference, it's open to everyone who would like to participate and join us. I also just want to tell you about one webinar series that's coming up in October. It's a 3-part native plant series, October 11, 12, and 13. October 11 is identifying and preventing plant extinction events. October 12 is collaborating to conserve crop wild relatives. And long-term data and outcomes from the NATUA, grasslands, and restoration. And you can register for all 3 at once and save money, or you can just register for the individual ones that you would like to. And now I'd like to turn to our program today and to our speakers. Our first speaker is Tom Kaye. He's the founder and executive director of the Institute for Applied Ecology, a nonprofit organization with the mission to conserve native habitats and species through research, restoration, and education. He is also a courtesy associate professor in the Department of Botany and Plant Pathology at the Oregon State University. Tom conducts research on rare species, reintroductions, habitat restoration, plant invasions, and plant population responses to climate change, and engages prison inmates in conservation through the Sagebrush in Prisons project. Say that fast. Sourcing native plants for restoration is a key area of interest and research and publication for Dr. Kaye. He serves as commission member on the IUCN SSC Seed Conservation Specialist Group. So Tom, I see you're on screen. Do you want to go ahead and do your intro and then I'll introduce Alexis and Maria, or would you like me to go ahead and introduce?
Oh, no, go on with them, please.
Okay. Our second speaker is Alexis. She is Plant Materials Program Director at IE's Northwest Office, where she began working in 2019 as the Northwest Seed Partnership Coordinator. She received her MS in Ecology from Oregon State University in 2013 and a BS in Environmental Science from the University of Kansas in 2008. She fell in love with native plants and restoration during an internship in Gunnison, Colorado, planting trees along the Gunnison River. Her next step was to move to Oregon and work in IAE's conservation program for 2 seasons, traveling throughout the state, monitoring threatened and endangered plants. Post-grad school, she worked for 2 watershed councils, one on the southern Oregon coast and one on the Rogue River Valley, taking on salmon habitat restoration projects, including invasive species removal, dam removal, floodplain connectivity, riparian restoration, and large wood replacement. Alexis brings her diverse skill in project management and a passion for Oregon's native plants to IAE. And our last speaker is Maria Mullins. Maria is the Assistant Director at IAE's Southwest Office and has been coordinating the Southwest Seed Partnership since 2019. Maria has a diverse background in natural resources across the West, and after receiving her MS in Ecology in 2019, she was thrilled to have the opportunity to dive into the native plant materials world. Maria works with partners to identify seed needs and target species, coordinate crews collecting wild seed, and contracts with farmers to increase seed production fields. Maria enjoys working with diverse stakeholders who share common goals and want more species and local sources available for Southwest restoration. So I will now turn it over to you, Tom.
I'm Tom Kaye. I'm the Executive Director at the Institute for Applied Ecology, and we're really very pleased to present to you this webinar on seed partnerships that we've been very involved with for the last decade or more. Institute for Applied Ecology is a nonprofit organization based in Corvallis, Oregon, and Santa Fe, New Mexico, and our mission is to conserve native species and habitats through restoration, research, and education. And seeds and plant materials in general are at the core of a lot of what we do. So seed partnerships are crucial to getting seeds available for restoration. These collaborations that increase seed availability are often grassroots and organic in origin, and then need structure in order to successfully supply the seeds that restorationists need. In fact, many of us involved in the seed partnerships are the restorationists that will be using those seeds. So we're very engaged and very committed to making sure these seeds are available. So these are, in general, they're partnerships or collaboratives. And what we're finding is that the need for seed is very ubiquitous across the country, and in fact, across the globe. Seeds are at the very root, so to speak, of restoration. You can't restore many habitats without these plant materials. So seed partnerships and collaboratives really become integral to the restoration supply chain, if you will. Without these seeds and without the partnerships to make them available, we simply don't have the seeds we need. And one of the things that many of you know about seeds is that, first off, the plants we use are very diverse. We need lots of different kinds. And second of all, we need local genetics. We need to respect the local adaptation that often occurs in these species. And if we ignore that, we ignore it to our peril and to the failure of our restoration projects, because the plants don't take and they don't do well. So Also, these partnerships can learn from one another. This is an opportunity for us to share for you some of the lessons we've learned from putting together partnerships and helping our teams of agencies and other organizations we work with. And we are also looking for preparation for climate change, for the sustainability of these restorations in the long run. And that could be a challenge to have both genetic material that's adapted and adaptable for the future. And so that's one of our challenges that we all really work towards meeting head on. And so that has to do with what populations we select and what emphasis we put on certain genotypes. Next slide, please. So the potential of seeds, this is a great slide because it really shows at the middle that we need to get seeds and get them growing for near-term use. We really have a lot of immediate needs for seeds on the ground, and we need them for restoration, but we also need them for the research and development to make sure the plant materials are working and get better plant materials out there. But in the long term, we also have needs, and that's building regional plant materials programs. These may be seed partnerships, they may be government agency programs, etc. But these seeds need to be able to be stored and available over the long term to meet future needs. So as we gear up for better storage and meeting future needs, we have greater restoration capacity, and we're better prepared for climate change and to meet catastrophic events when they do happen. Wildfires, for example, or intense storms, etc. Things that disturb and damage vegetation on a large scale. So we need the capacity to respond in short notice to these punctuated sorts of events as well. Next slide. So partnerships and collaboratives are happening in this country. We don't know about all of them, but we knew about at least 20 or so of various types. Many of them are these grassroots groups of organizations getting together and trying to find out how do we make the seeds available? What species do we need in our area? How are we going to get those collected from the wild and then put into production so that we have the volumes of seeds we need, etc. Some are government agencies that have really tried to frame this on a local basis and try to get production going on, etc. But you can see on this list that mainly we know of these partnerships in the West. And there's one sort of random dot there that represents Hawaii over on the lower left corner. And so these partnerships are happening, and we have a lot to learn from one another to help us make sure we get them done right. And there's many different models for how to do them. There is no just one right way. Everybody's making it up as we go along, and which is kind of exciting and a little bit inefficient. And so we have the opportunity to leverage from one another. And next slide. And so one of the projects we run at the Institute for Applied Ecology is the Native Seed Network. And this is an online resource for anybody to go to and both post seeds they have available, say they're a nursery and they want to sell their seeds so they can list their inventory, and also to find seeds from a local provenance that they need for their own restoration. And the website has sort of contracted a little bit, and we're in the process of rebuilding it. So look for more and more functionality from this website in the coming year or 2 years. So we're rebuilding the website and the native seed nursery listings. It will be a hub for seed partnerships to find each other and find their resources. It'll be a central location to find seed sourcing tools. There are several really great online tools for seed sourcing, and especially in the face of climate change, that many of us need, but sometimes are kind of hard to find. So we're going to list them all in one place. And then it'll also be a place to find information about the National Native Seed Conference. Next slide. And so here's a save the date for the next National Native Seed Conference, which will be March 27th to the March 21st to the 27th, 2023. It will cover many different topics, including traditional ecological knowledge, wild seed collection, seed production, industry perspectives and needs, etc., and including seed partnerships. We want this conference to be a convocation for seed partnerships in particular. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Alexis to talk about some, continue talking about examples of seed partnerships we work with. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And hello, everyone. I'm Alexis Larsen. So yeah, we're going to dive into talking about the 3 seed partnerships that IAE coordinates. I'll talk about 2 that we coordinate in the Northwest, and Maria will talk about our Southwest seed partnership. And then we'll go into kind of talking about some general ways to establish your own partnership and some lessons learned, and then we'll do our question and answers. So I'm going to start with our Willamette Valley Native Plant Partnership here in Oregon. This partnership was formed in 2012 with a mission to provide native plant materials to partners to protect and restore the native ecosystems of the Willamette Valley ecoregion. Next slide. This map shows the Willamette Valley ecoregion, which is a level 3 region. This entire valley is accepted as the seed transfer zone for the partnership, which means seed can be collected throughout the ecoregion and combined to establish our seed production fields. The green dots here indicate our partners and our partner offices, and then the pink dots indicate growers that we've worked with either currently or in the past. So we've got a pretty decent, representation throughout the valley of state and federal agencies, county groups, nonprofits, and then our growers as well, our partners. Next slide. And one major goal of this partnership has been to increase the genetic diversity in the seed available for restoration and for revegetation projects. This partnership invested a lot of effort into seed collection over the last 8 years. We took a couple years off based on capacity and funding, but for the most part, we've had a 2 to 4 person collection crew each year that the partnership has been around, and the goal was to collect from at least 15 sites across the Willamette Valley and also sample from across each population. Multiple collections were made at each site over a couple different years in some cases, as well as across the season to collect the kind of that earlier and then later phenology. We collected from remnant populations, so no areas that had been restored or planted previously. So this included collecting from roadsides, conservation lands, private properties, and public lands, especially from a lot of our local wildlife refuges. And we had a goal of collecting about 10 to 15 species each year in the beginning. That's tapered off a little bit now that we've had a good amount of seed collected over the last 10 years. And now we're kind of focused on 2 to 4 species per year. Next slide. And this is just a sample of our collection maps for a couple species. On the left is Iris tenax, or Oregon iris. We had a pretty good collection across most of the counties found in the Willamette Valley. And then the other species is our Western buttercup, Ranunculus occidentalis. And the photos there show our production, the resulting production beds out at the IAE farm. So we'll talk about this with each of these partnerships and then a little bit in general towards the end, but a really important part of establishing your seed partnership is determining what business or partnership model you want to employ. The Willamette Valley Native Plant Partnership uses a cooperative model, or a contributing partners model, we've also called it. And this basically means that a few partners that are able to have provided funding upfront to help establish the partnership and fund seed collection effort and begin the production fields. And then the seed that is produced is shared amongst those partners based on what they contributed. And the remaining seed, once that payback seed has been covered, is available for sale to other partners that were unable to contribute. And so that's how they can contribute, is by purchasing our seed. And in 2017, we began to transition to more of a sustainability model, meaning that we would cover operation costs with seed sales each year. And we haven't quite gotten to that point yet. It's still definitely a long transition to that, but our seed sales have been increasing over the last 3 years. And so we're hopeful for the future of that partnership. We've also had some grants to assist with to kind of match the other partner contributions as well. Next slide. And this is a brief timeline of the big accomplishments for this partnership. As I've mentioned, it was established 10 years ago in 2012, but 2013 was really our flagship year. We developed an MOU, we drafted and adopted a 5-year strategic plan. We convened steering committees, a steering committee and a species selection committee, which prioritized the production species and what species we wanted to collect. We had our first wild seed collection and we established our first production beds. Most years from after that, we've continued seed collection as well as increased our production efforts. In 2015, we had our first significant distribution to partners. I always like to note that, you know, it's definitely takes a few years to get a seed partnership up and running and to actually you know, produce enough seed to make it available for partners. And so it took this partnership a few years. And I think really in 2016 was our first, you know, ability to really send seed out. We had, you know, up to 5 or 8 species, I think, in production at that point that were producing good yields. So, and over the next 5 years, we just continue to expand on these efforts. And in 2021, after about 10 years in, we started a stakeholder engagement campaign. Engagement with partners had kind of waned over time, and we'll discuss that challenge towards the end of this presentation. So we applied for a grant through the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board to do some stakeholder engagement activities, including one-on-one partner interviews to talk about the, you know, partners' demand for their species and their upcoming restoration projects and what they would like to see the partnership do in the future for the Valley. We've started a newsletter that we send out in the spring and the fall, as well as some blog posts. And then we're working on doing some presentations to other groups like cooperative weed management areas to find more partners. And then also from these efforts, we decided we wanted to have what started as a small regional conference and then quickly grew into almost more of a national virtual native plant materials conference that we had this past January in 2022. Next slide. And then this is just a quick glance at some of the big numbers from the past 10 years for this partnership. We started at around 21 partners, I believe, and we've grown to 33 partners. We've collected 75 pounds of native seed from 27 species. We've entered 21 of those species into production at some point or another, and we've distributed 3,000 pounds of seed. And I think I'm handing it over to Maria next.
Thanks, Alexis. Morning, everyone, or good afternoon for some of you. I'm Maria Mullins. I'm here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, which is where the Southwest branch of Institute for Applied Ecology is located. And today I'm going to be talking about another partnership called the Southwest Seed Partnership. That's in a different region, of course, but also set up with a different model than the Willamette Valley one that Alexis just mentioned. And so similar to other partnerships, the goal of the SWSP is to increase the supply of native plant materials for the ever-increasing restoration needs we have here in the Southwest. And the particular type of seed that we are prioritizing is locally sourced seed with high levels of genetic diversity, which is a type of plant material that we expect to be more successful in the long run. And it's also not very widely available on the commercial marketplace right now. We also want to increase the diversity of species that are available, especially forbs, which are in really high demand, but they are oftentimes more difficult to produce for growers, and they're usually cost prohibitive to the seed user, even the few that are available right now. And so the vision for this partnership is to develop plant materials across 2 states, both New Mexico and Arizona, and sort of leverage the resources and the geographic location and the technical expertise of all of our partners together. And so the partnership was launched in 2015, which is the same year that the National Seed Strategy was released by the Bureau of Land Management. And so this provides like a really great framework for our work, and our strategic planning goals really align with those of the national strategy. We know that we don't really need to reinvent the wheel when there are a lot of great people working towards similar goals in similar or in different regions across the country. And so really our long-term vision is to see a thriving native seed economy here in the Southwest region. So I mentioned we're working across 2 states, and this map shows the level 3 ecoregions for the Southwest. So you can see 4 at least of the ecoregions cross the state boundaries multiple times. And so it's really for this reason why it makes a lot of sense to work collaboratively with our partners in both states. Here on this map, the black points represent seed collections that have been made from Southwest Seed Partnership seed collection crews from 2015 to 2021. And the red points are scouting points, which could be future seed collections. And so based on where the points are sort of stratified across the colored ecoregions here, you can kind of see the way, or the ecoregions in which our partners have sort of prioritized their seed collections around. And so we use what we call a collaborative partnership model, which has a few differences than the model that Alexis just went through. And so with the collaborative model, I like to think about it as though we facilitate or assist to facilitate native plant materials development on behalf of our partners. And so each partner can support different aspects of the partnership, and we can set up collaborative seed collection or production or collaborative research projects. However, the seed that's funded for collection or for production by an individual partner is managed and kept separate during all of the phases of the native plant materials cycle, like collection, tracking, storage. And then that partner can decide on the eventual use of that seed. And so a lot of our partners are willing to share seed, especially when it comes to relevant research that is ongoing and that is of interest to anybody in sort of the restoration world. However, it is up to the discretion of the partner that funded either the collection or the production for how much they'd like to share and for what projects. So that's quite a bit different than the cooperative model that you heard about before. And here's just a list of a few of our awesome partners and funders. We are primarily grant and contract funded. And then the pie chart on the right shows that you can see the blue is the portion of our funding that goes to seed production fields, which is paying our farmers to produce all of the seed. And so that takes up a pretty good chunk of our funding. And then the rest are really split fairly evenly between restoration, on the ground restoration, research, seed collection, and then coordination. Here's a quick glimpse at our version of the native plant materials development cycle. You've probably seen similar diagrams from other partnerships or other seed programs, but I'm just going to go through it briefly so that we are on the same page. So in the upper left-hand corner, it all starts with wild seed collection. And so really none of this would be possible at all without our crews doing like the hard work of collecting the seed from the wild. And we call that Generation 0 or G0 seed. And then that wild collected seed is cleaned and processed and tested and stored in our seed cleaning facility and seed cooler in Santa Fe. And then from there, the seed can take a few different avenues. A portion of it is used directly for research, since there's still a lot that we don't know about novel species that are of interest for restoration, but that we don't know exactly how to use the best practices in restoration projects. And there's still a lot that we don't know about this type of germplasm. And so a portion of it gets used for research, and then another small portion gets used for long-term seed banking. And a great example of that is the portion of seed that gets saved through the BLM Seeds of Success program. And then on the bottom, a big portion, I estimated 65%, but the majority of the seed gets used as the source seed to start seed production fields, which is really the best way of increasing the quantity of seed that becomes available for partnerships and on the marketplace. And so at that point, after the seed is planted and established in seed production fields and gets harvested, we call that Generation 1 seed. And then it goes through the same process of getting cleaned and tested and stored. And then it becomes available for the partner, in the Southwest case, for the partner that funded the production. And so then we let them know that the seed's ready for use for whatever they're interested in using it for. And that happened for us for the first time in 2020, sort of the full circle, which was really exciting. But it's just an example that, like Alexis mentioned, it can take a long time to get through this whole process. Okay, so every step of the seed development process is really important and crucial. Another way of like talking about the steps is everything in white text that goes down along the arrow here. And so what we found, at least in the Southwest, is that most partners can really only support a few of the key tasks that are needed to reach our sort of lofty regional seed goals, just based on funding restrictions and agency priorities and whatnot. And so what we found, though, is that by working together with multiple partners, and different partners contributing different types of support, we can actually get through all these steps and reach the goal of having seed available for our restoration needs. And so different partners can contribute different types of things like funding, technical support, sometimes just volunteer labor, which is awesome, resources, research, or actually take a lead or collaborate on some of our tasks. And then I also just wanted to talk a little bit about the sort of structure and roles of our partnership for those of you that might be interested in starting one in a different region. And so the way that ours is set up is that IE coordinates the partnership, and sort of creates opportunities for resources and knowledge sharing amongst our stakeholders. So a lot of times that's just like getting in touch with folks that are in some way involved in the native plant material world and hearing about what they're interested in or what they're doing or what they want to do, and then connecting them with other folks that are doing similar things in the region. Our stakeholders participate in stakeholder meetings. They can also help with surveys, coordinating on different types of seed plant materials projects. They can sign the memorandum of understanding and help with fundraising. We also have technical committees that work on technical needs, and a few examples are identifying research gaps in native plant materials, or we also had a seed quality committee, and so these are happening at this point on sort of an as-needed basis. But our steering committee is really the group that helps us with sort of our long-term vision and strategy for the partnership. And so last year, in 2021, we actually met monthly all year with our steering committee in order to write a new strategic plan, which will guide our work for the next 5 years starting in 2023. So that was really great, and a lot of work, and we're very appreciative of that group. And so at this point now we're back to meeting quarterly with the steering committee. Okay, here's a timeline similar to the one that Alexis showed. And so we've accomplished quite a bit in the last 5-6 years. And so in 2015, the partnership was established and we had a small contract crew collecting seeds in Arizona. And then the next year we had our first steering committee meeting, and started doing seed collection for a couple different crews in New Mexico, and expanded our sort of collaborators and funders. And in 2017, we hired a Southwest Seed Partnership coordinator, which has been a permanent position ever since, and really crucial to kind of keep making sure everything is continuing to run and function well. And we also were able to purchase some seed cleaning equipment and hold the first stakeholder meeting in New Mexico. Let's see, in 2018, there was a stakeholder meeting in Arizona, and we established our first seed production fields. And so you can see that the first 3 years were dedicated really just to seed collection, and then other parts of like coordinating the partnership. And so production kicked off in 2018. And then since then, really our capacity has expanded on sort of all of those fronts in the last few years. We were able to acquire a seed cleaning facility and a seed cooler here in Santa Fe. We also hired a permanent plant materials technician position to really help with all of our seed processing work. And we've been coordinating more crews collecting seed on the ground, and have doubled our seed production effort. last year in 2021. We've also been able to expand the number of growers and nurseries that we're contracting for grow outs, which has been really great. And so as of now, we've established 28 different seed production fields and made almost 2,000 collections, wild collections, hired quite a bit of staff, both seasonal and permanent staff, and then harvested over 500 pounds of seed. And so there's still a lot of work to do in order to sort of reach our goal of making this type of seed really easily accessible, especially when we're talking about on the open marketplace. But we're excited that we have a plan now for the next 5 years and that we can keep making strides towards those goals. I think it's back to you now, Alexis.
Okay, thanks, Maria. Yeah, I'm gonna kind of wrap up our IAE seed partnership portion with a little detail about our Coastal Native Seed Partnership, which is our newest partnership, which was established in 2020 with a mission to support coastal restoration and revegetation projects with genetically and ecologically appropriate native plant materials, very similar to our other partnership missions. Next slide. And here's a map of the geographic scope of the Coastal Native Seed Partnership and our partner office locations. We currently cover the whole Oregon coast and into Southwest Washington, which includes Willapa Bay Refuge. This partnership was developed, the idea of it came out of an Oregon silver spot butterfly working group. So this partnership focuses a lot on coastal prairie restoration for that butterfly, but also dune restoration and estuary and freshwater restoration projects as well. So our species list is an attempt to cover those 4 habitat types. Next. And this partnership could also be considered a collaborative partnership, but maybe in a slightly different way than the Southwest Seed Partnership. IAE is the central coordinating entity as well as the fiscal manager for this partnership, or the financial manager. But we have relied on a lot of partner help for this partnership. So including wild seed collection. I think to date, partners have contributed about 75% of our wild seed collections, which is really great and helpful. Having such a long but narrow ecoregion to collect from is difficult when you have a part-time crew. We don't have a full-time crew for seed collection for this partnership yet. And so having partners that can, tackle more of the South and North Coast while we collect on the mid-coast has been very helpful. Partners have also assisted with grower outreach to help us connect with local coastal growers. That's a major goal of this partnership. And we held a question and answer session last fall with a couple growers, and we're actually going to meet a couple of them later this week and see their properties and talk about species that might be appropriate for their sites. We've also had partners take the lead on working with Oregon State University students to build a database that will house information on coastal seed needs, current production and inventory, and also track restoration projects. So that's with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, made that connection for us. And additionally, we have several partners funding their own production fields with the intent to share some of the seed with other partners in exchange for some sort of in-kind match. And then we're currently funded through grants at the moment. Next slide. And here's a brief timeline of our events and when we've accomplished certain tasks for this partnership. As I've mentioned, it was just formed a couple years ago. We established a steering committee and a species selection committee. We held a kickoff meeting with stakeholders in January of 2020 and talked a lot about geographic scope, habitats, decision-making, the functions we wanted this partnership to perform, who was going to do those functions. And we captured all of those decisions and information in an operations plan. And then that plan was used to build a 5-year strategic plan that we wrote at the end of 2020. We also developed and had partners sign an MOU. We had our first seed collection and we established our first seed production field that was, partnership owned, not produced by another partner. In 2021, we continued our species prioritization process, which has been a bit of a hurdle with having 4 different habitat types. That's a lot of species to look at and figure out which are appropriate for production and which are in demand by partners. We continued our collection and production efforts. And then we held that grower outreach session that I just mentioned in the fall. And in 2022, we're right now in the middle of additional seed collection and hoping to establish at least one production field this fall, which would bring us to a total of 4 production fields. We're hoping to work with Fish and Wildlife in Oregon State to get that database up and running, and then also do a market analysis, both internal and external. So talking with partners about their species needs and the quantity in terms of the size of their upcoming restoration projects. So how many pounds of seed they might be after, which can be a difficult thing to nail down. But then also looking at the external market and seeing what kind of coastal genetics are available out there on the market, and where and how can we fill in the gaps. And next slide. Okay, so I think we're moving on now from IAEC partnerships to more general glance at how to establish a partnership, like one of the ones we've just talked about. There's a lot of information to convey about this topic. I'm going to try to do a quick overview over a couple slides, and then hopefully we can expand on each of these points during the second half of this webinar with some questions. And I broke down the first 3 steps into 3 main areas: establishing a structure, determining a business model, and finding contributions. So to start with structure, I think the most crucial part when getting started is having a central coordinating entity with a staff position that is at least partially dedicated to coordinating the partnership, whether it's a quarter time or half time to start. It might grow into a full-time position. Our current seed partnership position is half coast, half Willamette Valley. But I think at this point, each one could almost be a full-time position. It's really essential to have that main point of contact, to keep records, to communicate with partners, and disseminate information, as well as be the financial administrator if you're grant funded. And then connecting with all your stakeholders and partners, and invite them to a kickoff meeting to discuss your common goals and visions, and start making some decisions about what you want the partnership to be. Understanding the current seed and seed market and finding potential growers is extremely important. You know, are there growers interested in growing native seeds or plants? Are there already experienced growers that want to diversify their crops? There's definitely a bit of research to do when getting started in terms of your external grower market. Convening committees, likely having a steering committee to help guide the partnership and assist with decision making, and then other technical committees that can be developed, such as a species selection committee to prioritize species, a research committee, seed quality, you know, whatever else might help meet the needs and the goals of your partnership. Determining the geographic scope and your target habitats for plant production is an important step. And then considering your genetics and how you want to build diversity into your seed that's produced, and paying attention to seed transfer zones, and you know, having partners weigh in on those decisions. And then, of course, creating and prioritizing a species list of species that are appropriate for seed amplification based on partner need and ecological function, and how they might do in a production setting. Okay, next. And then the partnership model. So we've talked about a couple of these: the cooperative or contributing partner model, and then a collaborative partner model as well. One idea we've had that I haven't seen, you know, in action yet is like a CSA, or community supported agriculture model, similar to the ones you might see with your local farmers at your farmers market. Essentially all partners purchasing a share of each year's harvest up front, but without the ability to decide what species they get and what amount. Kind of like when you end up with a lot of zucchini or squash at the end of the season. And then you could do individual partner fields. This kind of goes with the collaborative model in a way as well. So basically having partners pay for their own seed production, and then the partnership acts as a coordinator to facilitate collecting and sharing of information, you know, who is collecting what species, who's producing it, where is it being stored, and what might be available for trade. And that's how the Coastal Partnership worked for a while, until we kind of formed as a more official partnership. And then you could also do a grower focused model where you would increase, you provide grower support to grow fields on spec and subsidize the upfront costs like seed collection, and then encourage partners to purchase that seed from those growers. And then things to consider when determining that partnership model is, decision making. So what kind of decisions and who's going to make those decisions? So such as who can be a member, what species to put into production, applying for new funding, how will the seed be dispersed? So if it's a cooperative model, that's really important, a part of that partnership. We disperse first to our contributing partners, and then the remaining seed is available for sale. So decision-making, essential functions. So information tracking, facilitating seed trade, communication, meeting facilitation, strategic planning. There's a lot of functions these seed partnerships can have, and that, depending on how you want to do those functions or who wants to do them, might determine your partnership model. And then, of course, your budget and the funding that you have available, which leads me to the next slide. And so just, quick glance at different contributions you could have to start these seed partnerships. There's, of course, grants. We've had state grants through the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board up here in Oregon, as well as some federal grants through the BLM. Partner contributions for the Coastal Partnership. We actually had the Nature Conservancy pay for establishing a new field, a perennial field, and they received the first year's yield, and now we're using the grant to pay for the next year's, and then that seed will be available to partners. Contracts or assistance agreements with federal agencies. Having technical support or in-kind match from your partners can really help. I think that's where some of the seed collection can come in. And I know with volunteers in the Rogue Native Plant Partnership in Southern Oregon, they do a lot of seed blitzes and use volunteers to help them collect seed. And then you might find some grant or funding opportunities through research grants or universities as well. And I think the next section is on Maria.
Thanks, Alexis. We have one more slide. I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the challenges and the lessons learned that we've come across in our experience running seed partnerships. And we thought also this could be a good way to think of some questions from you all for us for the panel section. So one thing that can be difficult is for seed users and partners to forecast their seed needs well in advance. It's really necessary just because of how long the entire native plant materials development process takes, from thinking about you might need to collect seed for more than one season in order to get enough to start a field. Fields typically don't start having really high yields until the second, third, fourth year sometimes. So by the time you kind of like have your target species list ready, it can still be like 5-8 years by the time sort of seed's coming off a field and is ready for restoration. But that can be really tricky for partners who are dealing with limitations like short-term budgets, capacity limitations to spend a lot of time thinking and forecasting their seed needs, staff turnover. So that can be tricky for some stakeholders. Another challenge is finding funding that's not necessarily long-term, but longer term for production fields. So this is, especially related to production, but relevant to other parts of the process as well. But at least in the Southwest, we make 3-year contracts with seed producers, since, like I said, sometimes in the first year you don't get a harvest at all, and so it's best for everyone to do a 3-year contract. But we can't sign a contract until we have all 3 years of funding saved for that grower, so that we know we can pay them. And so needing to sort of save up and stock up a larger amount of funding beforehand can be challenging because of our budget limitations and partners and agreement periods ending and other logistics. Another challenge is seed accessing the commercial marketplace, which this one might be specific to the Southwest depending on the partnership model. But right now, and I didn't go into this very much, but right now all of our production with growers is through contracts. And so that's worked out well in the beginning just because it does remove some of the risk to the grower, for especially if it's a new grower who has never actually grown seed as a crop before, sort of transitioning to this new type of growing. But it's also not sort of a long-term sustainable model in terms of, eventually we'd really like growers to continue those fields on their own and then sell that seed through their own marketplaces, which we haven't done to, and there's challenges for many reasons. And part of our strategic plan for the next 5 years is to actually work with established seed producers who know their business model and probably have some great ideas for how to make that happen, and also bringing in small growers who might not have any kind of access to that market. And so that's one goal for the next few years. And also, I just wanted to mention that if any of you are interested in hearing more about challenges to growers in growing this type of seed, in January, we did the Native Plant Materials Virtual Conference, and we did 2 grower panels, one for the Northwest and one for the Southwest. And those are recorded and available on our YouTube channel. And it's super interesting to hear from the growers themselves about what is hard and what is great about growing this type of seed. So I'd encourage you to watch those. Finding new seed growers can be difficult too, like Alexis mentioned. There are a lot of benefits of growing native plants for seed for growers, especially when it comes to like on-farm conservation and conserving water and fertilizer and other inputs. But it's also really tricky, especially on a small scale when you have sort of limited infrastructure and labor, because it's really labor intensive. So that can be difficult. And then another challenge can be keeping partners engaged. And this can happen for a lot of different reasons. Alexis mentioned it as well, but part of it is, for the coordinating entity. So if it's IE, making sure that we have someone in the role of that sort of coordinator or communicator, and making sure that the partners who were initially engaged in some project or the partnership in general are getting frequent updates and receiving good communication from our end. And that can be difficult depending on timing and capacity and funding. And then just making sure that, the time put into those relationships are worth it and everything keeps running smoothly. So those are a few of the challenges, and we thought they might bring up some questions from you all. And I think that's our last slide. Yeah. So thanks everyone. And we have quite a bit of time for questions, it looks like.
Yeah, so we made this program 90 minutes because we knew that this would be a topic of great interest to everyone, and that has proven true. Even with the problems in chat, which I am so sorry, I have to apologize for that problem. Apparently it's a Zoom related update that no one had any idea about, and it changed the defaults. So my apologies that chat is not working, but people have been emailing their questions to info@naturalareas.org. Please feel free to do so. And we have plenty of questions. So why don't we jump right in? So just one question I want to ask before we get into some of the details about the partnership. Do you do anything with tree seed collection? You can all go off mute if you like.
No, in Oregon, we're really focused on forbs and some grasses and rushes and sedges.
Okay.
So, yeah.
It was just somebody asked, so I just thought I would just throw that out there.
And I'll just also mention that in the Southwest, we're mostly focused on understory shrubs and grass species too, but there is a huge effort in New Mexico and in the Southwest to collect tree seeds for reforestation purposes. I can put the link to their work in the chat after this.
Okay, great. If you put it in host and panelists, then I can post it to everyone.
Okay, thank you.
So could you please summarize the pros and cons of each native plant material model? There's some sense of trying to wrap their heads around collaborative versus cooperative. And then how do you analyze seed demand prior to forming a partnership?
I could start with some of that. So yeah, pros and cons of the cooperative model. I think one huge part of that is having partners that are willing and able to contribute the funding up front. So for the Willamette Valley Partnership, it was a lot of the federal partners, the BLM, Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps, but then we also had the Nature Conservancy was able to contribute, and then an agency in Portland called Metro was able to contribute some funding up front as well. But with the coastal partnership, the resources aren't as strong with those agencies, or we don't have the same agencies that are represented on the coast. So we haven't had that same kind of upfront contribution. And I wasn't here at the start of the Willamette Valley Partnership, but I can definitely see how that was extremely helpful in starting the partnership and not having to worry about applying for grants to get it funded. Our first grant was in, I think, 2016 with a technical assistance grant, and then with a restoration grant in 2017 that lasted a few more years. Yeah, and so I think the hardest part of these partnerships is that long-term funding, which Maria just mentioned, and I'll let maybe Maria jump in about the collaborative model as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It might take us a little bit of time to we'd probably have to sit down and make a good pro-con list, but it'd be a good exercise. And I think related to what Alexis mentioned with the collaborative model, if folks don't have funding up front, it's a little bit more possible to still access the sort of shared knowledge and pooled resources and training that the coordinating entity has. But depending on what your agency requires as far as, what gets put into the proposal and what you use the funding for, keeping things separate throughout the process could potentially be advantageous for some partners, depending on who their organization is. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there for now, but that's a great question and probably one that it would be good to kind of chat about further.
I'll just chime in to say that the terms partnership and cooperative and even collaborative can have legal meanings. And so sometimes when you're putting together your group, what you call it can have implications, whether or not those are partnership with a capital P or not. And so when you go to making a memorandum of understanding with a government agency, for example, one name may affect how they can participate with you versus another name. So looking into that sort of thing early can be helpful as well. Yeah, it's non-trivial.
That sounds like great advice. This is a question for Maria. Are the collections in the Southwest conducted across jurisdictions or confined to political boundaries? So for example, if BLM is paying for a collection, can they collect a portion from a parkland or only BLM lands? Thinking about ecotype creation here, as well as looking for a precedent for sharing of seed from a state parkland for the benefit of the partnership.
Yeah, good question. The partner can really dictate not only the seed transfer zone that they'd like to use. That's really the way that we've been doing it, is on a partner basis. So say we're facilitating a seed collection effort for a partner. One of the things that we talk about all up front is not only the target species list, but what their seed transfer zone is. And so that sort of dictates the first round of restriction as far as where the seed crew goes. But we do apply for permits for not just the jurisdiction for the partner. So say it's a BLM crew, they can, collect on BLM land, but we can also gather permits for that crew to collect on other types of public or private land. So we do that every year with almost all of our crews, just to sort of diversify the landscapes and the habitats that they can access. And it just is important because of the different states of different areas every year, and who's had monsoons and who hasn't. And so that can be pretty important. It's just making sure that you have a diverse group of sites that you can collect seed from.
Okay. Do your partners within these partnerships engage volunteers with the native seed collection, cleaning, or other skill-based roles? If so, do you offer central resources to directly support volunteers across the partnerships with recruitment, training, those kinds of things?
I can start, and then it looks like Alexis has some feedback too, but we really do try to get volunteers interested and willing to help with seed collection and seed cleaning. Um, it can be hard to it can be hard for us to have the capacity to do that on a large effort. We actually just hired a education and outreach coordinator for the Southwest, which we're really excited about in order to sort of ramp up that potential, because there's a huge potential to get volunteers to help with both of those. So we do usually host a couple seed collection events and seed cleaning. Last year we did have a couple really successful seed cleaning events for volunteers, and it just took someone to sort of like do the training session to begin with, and making sure that the right species were being collected, and making sure that sustainable protocols were being followed as far as the seed collection. And then seed processing, we provided the facility and the equipment, and really it just the extra hands that was really helpful, especially for large amounts of seed. Do you have some?
Yeah, we haven't worked with volunteers really for either partnership other than other partners on the coast helping collect seed. And we have provided some seed collection guides, so identification, and then protocols, which are usually based on Seeds of Success collection protocols. But that is one of our goals right now, is to start developing some more resources for partners to have for collection and seed-based restoration and other topics like that. But we haven't worked with general public volunteers yet.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things about volunteers is it's an amazing way to increase capacity to get more done, for obvious reasons. And it carries some potential risks. For example, there's liability, so you need to have a kind of insurance that will manage that. But also sometimes if there are lookalike species in your area, and even with training, people collect the wrong thing, you can end up with a mixed field, which can just be either not so bad or a terrible disaster. So you really have to consider which species you want people to collect as volunteers or semi-professional, because even the professionals can get it wrong. And so you just need to manage that risk.
Okay. Can you elaborate on establishing nursery relationships? What business plan has worked for selling seeds, selling plugs, finished plants, that kind of thing?
I'll start again. So the way that we usually contract out nursery production for a specific production field. So say we have a partner that is interested in producing 2 species, 3,000 plugs each on a 1/4 acre or whatever it might be. We have a couple nursery producers that we work closely with to establish just the nursery production part of that contract before those plugs are produced and then established and planted into a seed production field, which is another contract with another grower. Some large seed producers have their own nursery production facilities, or they have their own subcontracted nursery producers that they want to work with, which is also fine. And so we sort of go based on the capacity of the grower that's actually going to be growing the seed out. But we have one really great nursery producer relationship with the Pueblo Santa Ana native plant nursery here in New Mexico. And so for any sort of small project, they have a ton of expertise in growing all kinds of different native species from the Southwest. And so for small projects that we're working with a grower that doesn't have a greenhouse or any type of nursery facility, we work with them first to do the plug production, and then work with the farmer to plant out those plugs and care for them. Alexis, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah, and Tom might have something to add too, maybe from how the Willamette Valley got started with some of our external growers. But IAE up here in Oregon is really fortunate to have a relationship with Oregon State University, and so we are able to lease some greenhouse space to grow plugs, as well as farm field space for some of our production fields for partnerships, but also just for partners, other partners in general. There are some established commercial growers that I had experience with native seed here, especially heritage seedlings and Pacific Northwest natives. and then Triangle Farm, which are all kind of based in the Salem, Albany area in the Willamette Valley. And so we've had contracts to grow fields with them as well. And then on the coast, we've had partners that had connections to farmers that grew more like produce and flowers for farmers markets, but had an interest in expanding to native seed. And so that's why we had that outreach meeting last October to make that connection and talk more about, their challenges of coastal growing and what we know about growing native plants for seed, and where we could meet, and try to make a connection there for establishing some fields.
So what are the qualities of a good seed production field? What do you look for?
That's a good question for our farm manager, I think. For starting, beginning site conditions, or once you have a field established? I don't know if there's a distinction.
Well, there is a question that relates a little further. Somebody asked a little further down, which is how many generations will the partnerships use the seed beds, and do your plans include maintaining genetic diversity?
Well, I can speak a little bit to the first question first. As far as, Alexis said, there's a few different things to think about. We do initial assessments with new growers if they're interested in growing seed, and that's just kind of related to what the condition of the field is in. If it's been fallow for a long time, if you imagine that there's just a really pretty intense weed seed bed there, it can take a lot of site prep in order to get it sort of ready for the point where you're going to be able to grow native plants without just a lot of weed pressure. Weeds are for sure probably the number one challenge for our growers here in the Southwest, is just managing weeds. And depending on their setup and their infrastructure, the tools look a lot different, and they can end up taking a lot of time and money to manage and control those. Water irrigation here in the Southwest is always an issue, and especially in the first year of establishing a field, it's important to have water at certain times, which can be tricky when people here are on acequias or flood irrigation, and so that you don't necessarily know when you're going to get water, which in drought years especially can be difficult. So those are weeds and water are two of the big things we think about.
Yeah, so I would say that, the ideal field for growing native plants, almost ironically, is an active agricultural field, one that's already set up, has the resources, some weeds are under control, and someone really knows how to be a farmer already. So those are the elements that come together.
When you are wild collecting, do you record GPS location, climate, soil, terrain characteristics, any of that stuff? Is that part of the process?
Yeah, we definitely collect information. We definitely collect coordinates, some information about the population, estimated size. A lot of that information.
Okay.
We use the Seeds of Success data sheets that the BLM SOS crews use, and we also have a few additional fields, but if anyone's interested in seeing all the data that they have to collect, you can find that at the BLM website. And there's a lot of other habitat and population information that goes into the data sheets.
Do landowning partners contributing seed get a portion of the seed back? And if so, how is that decided? Or does all the seed flow to other restoration partners or anyone who wants to purchase it from growers?
We've actually been having this conversation with the Fish and Wildlife Service on the coast right now. And in the past, public landowners have allowed us to collect as part of the partnership. But there has been some conversation about returning some seed or doing that trade for wild collected and then getting produced seed back. And it's an interesting conversation because we're trying to make at least the Willamette Valley partnership sustainable through seed sales. So giving away a portion of that seed, can be a significant, portion of our funding that we would hope to use for the next year. However, it is also a really nice way to build partnership and make connections. So I think kind of depends on your model and your situation, but I think we've had both, where we've been asked to provide seed back after collecting, or just being allowed to collect and use that for production.
So let's talk a little bit about sort of forming a partnership. So how do you find stakeholders to invite to even have a kickoff meeting?
Yeah, so I think there might be existing partnerships in your region already, like a cooperative weed management area, a working group for, an endangered wildlife species like the Oregon silver spot butterfly is kind of where the idea for the coastal partnership came from and how we made connections. There might be, restoration initiatives or partnerships around watershed councils, soil and water conservation districts as well. So I think finding some groups in your region and tapping into those, and then having it, spread by word of mouth, having, people, invite other partners that they work with, and, send them all back to that one contact person to get, a larger contact list going, to invite them all to an initial kind of kickoff or stakeholder meeting. I think there's probably already a lot of networks within your region that you could probably tap into to start finding some interest.
And so then it all comes down to money. So the next question is startup costs. Can you provide any information about what the startup costs might be for seed production, harvesting, and cleaning? And or maybe an easier question is a typical budget. I don't know what's the easiest to answer.
I could talk a little bit about, well, the first step, so especially like for a new partner, is finding the wild seed, which is sometimes it's easy to kind of jump to production and increasing the quantity, but without the source seed, it's impossible. So just thinking about how to fund a seed collection crew is a really good kind of first step. And this is very general, but funding like a 3-person seasonal crew for a few months, depending on how, when your seed might be right from in your target species, I would say would cost anywhere from like $30,000 to $60,000. And these are estimates, but it's, something to keep in mind. But that's like a full-time crew. You can also do it like some people just have folks that are on the ground, and maybe their main, work responsibility is forestry or weeds or something, but they can like make scouting points for seed collections and maybe grab some seed here and there. And so there are different ways to do it if you don't have like a huge set of funding set aside solely for seed collection. And so you can do it cheaper, but it could potentially take longer at that point too. Alexis, anything to add, Tom?
Yeah, I think, I'm looking at a couple of our reports, which have some, expenses lined out, and I think our annual budget, at least for the Willamette Valley partnership, is kind of in the 100 to 150,000 range. And then that definitely has, like, where the majority of that funding is spent has shifted over time. So of course, in the beginning, a large majority of that went to seed collection. Our 2014 report indicates about 70,000 for seed collection, but then as you're switching into more production, that kind of moves that number like 50 to 70 for production, maybe a little, actually more like 30 to 50, I think, for production these days. And then I also think project management and coordination can be a pretty hefty cost depending on, what level of coordinator you have. If it's quarter time or half time, that can add up, and then your admin and indirect costs as well. Add on to that.
Yeah, but so budgeting can be just the really hardest part of this in some ways. And one of the things to keep in mind is that when you have a final product and you want to figure out, well, what should we sell this maybe to ourselves for? How much of the cost that it took to put that product together do you really capture? And how much of those are defrayed by an outright grant, for example? And to what extent do you need to load the costs so that you have funding for your next year? In other words, how much do you keep using grants to keep the partnership afloat versus getting it to the point where it's sustainable on its own with the funds it creates from receiving funds for selling the seed to its partners. And adding grants lowers the cost, but it also can wear out your funders if you're coming back year after year saying, I want more funding for the same partnership. So it's a challenge, but consider the real costs of producing these seeds when setting your prices, rather than just like the cost of the current field. And there's all the collection, there's the first couple of years of growing it where you didn't get many seeds. There's the other fields that you grew that failed because it's farming and it doesn't always work. So you have to buffer those in as well. So, it's you have to think holistically about the entire budget.
Well, that actually is a great segue into the next question, which is how do you identify potential customers and markets for the seeds? Who've been the biggest customers and what have been their most common uses? Because I guess that's the sales side, right?
Yeah, so for us, both of our partnerships consist of partners from the federal, state agencies, nonprofits, land trusts. So all the organizations that are doing on the ground restoration work or our land managers. We don't really connect with private landowners except through those partners. So maybe like the watershed councils and things like that. And so our market is basically any of our partners and who have signed the MOU. So we do require that they sign that document. And so it is the agencies and nonprofits that we mostly sell to.
And then in the Southwest, since the model is set up a little bit differently, we don't sell any seeds. So all of the seed that's harvested during the duration of a contract with a grower goes back to the partner that actually funded that production. And so similar to the Northwest, we're facilitating production for the federal land management agencies right now, the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, National Park Service. And so, yeah, really the grower is able to continue that field after the contract ends, but during the contract, it really all goes back to that partner that funded it.
Okay. Is there any issue with the prohibition against the commercial exploitation of public resources that's found in the park code, especially thinking about this in terms of releasing ecotypes to growers for speculative production? So apparently in the park code, there's a prohibition against commercial exploitation of public resources. And have you run into that as an issue in terms of releasing these ecotypes to growers for speculative production?
At least for the Southwest, we haven't gotten to that point of releasing it for speculative production at this point, but I have heard from multiple partners about that. So like something in their, something that they wouldn't be able to actually get, maybe if the partnership was set up differently, like Tom said at the beginning, they actually wouldn't be able to be a partner and do production through that because of the selling of the seeds later. I don't know if it's just the state parks or the Park Service, but I think that's not unique to just them, because I've heard that before. Alexis and Tom, do you have any?
Well, certainly this can come up, and sometimes it has to do with the interpretation of the particular rules. So different people in an agency might interpret them differently and say, oh, that doesn't apply, or it does apply. And also sometimes it does apply, but it's an unintended consequence. So it's worth trying to work that out with the particular agency you work with. Sometimes people at an agency really want you to be able to collect their seed. And they want that genetic diversity to be part of the mix. It's important. You're not damaging the population. And if you're a nonprofit or something, maybe there's a way to work around this sort of, some commercial benefits interpretation. But then when you work into, say, giving the seeds away or providing the seeds to growers as foundation seeds, and then they sell those seeds, maybe for a profit. Okay, yeah, I can see the problem, but again, sometimes it has to do with interpretation and personalities of people. It's funny how that is when you try to work this out. Did you have anything to add, Alexis?
No, I think that sounds good.
How are you assessing genetic diversity?
Do you want to go first, Alexis?
That's a good question. I mean, with the Willamette Valley partnership, we we addressed it by, really trying to collect from as many populations as possible from throughout the whole Willamette Valley ecoregion. And then also, diversify our like spatial and temporal collections. So collecting throughout the season, across the population, if the species grew in, more in wet prairie and in more of an upland prairie, we'd collect from both of those sites. We haven't done any like follow-up assessment or genetic testing on our produced seed. I think the Southwest has done a little bit of that, but that is on our radar to look into and maybe try to do to see if we have captured that diversity and see if we've been successful. But we haven't done that yet in the Willamette Valley.
Yeah.
Well, I will add, Alexis, sorry to jump in, Maria, that in the Willamette Valley, with one of the endangered plants we work with, but it's through the same kind of process. We did work with some researchers and a graduate student to look explicitly at the genetic diversity in the wild where populations where seeds were collected, and then in the nursery, and then from those nursery plants into the restoration site to track, did what we expect to happen really did happen? You collect from multiple populations and you get more genetic diversity. The answer is yes. Is that represented in the nursery then? The answer was yes. And is that then represented in the field sites? It really was. So there are some assumptions we make in general that if you collect from multiple populations, you'll have higher genetic diversity, and that will be then represented throughout the process, including at the restoration site. And we were able to confirm that very solidly, that is the case. So there's some data, but it's expensive and time consuming to acquire. So we don't do that as part of our routine work. We're working with the model of this is how this should work. And in general, it seems to work that way.
Okay.
Go ahead, Maria.
Well, I was just going to talk about similar research that's happening right now in the Southwest. And I also heard about a really neat project that was happening in the Great Basin at I think it was the Nevada State Seed Forum recently. And so there is that work happening to kind of track the different types of selection that are happening at different stages of the plant materials process. We think about it a lot, even at the nursery production stage when we're trying to break dormancy and trying to think about which populations. So we try to strive for like 5 to 20 populations per accession from the same seed transfer zone, and then crews are trained to collect from across an entire population to get as much genetic diversity from this one population, collecting like this scraggly little plants on the borders and kind of evenly throughout. But it's really interesting to think about what are the genetics look like from the G1 seed that's harvested from the production field. And I just read a paper recently that did show what Tom said, that it was still fairly diverse from the harvested seed, but there's ongoing work happening right now too on that front.
Well, we're getting pretty close to time, but so I have 2 quick questions. Well, I think they're quick. Maria, you mentioned the new 5-year strategic plan, and somebody wants to know, you mentioned wanting to make more material available to the market. Did your advisory committee include anyone from the native seed production industry to give input on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do we have a grower? We do not have a grower right now on the steering committee, but part of the strategic plan is actually to work with a grower group to figure out that next step of getting seed into the commercial marketplace, because I've heard some really great ideas and they all involve large seed producers sort of being a hub, or they already have direct access to the open marketplace, and how could that work with working with smaller growers who don't and having a partnership there. And so part of our strategic plan happening in the next 5 years is to actually work with seed producers who might be able to give us a lot of insight and expertise into how we can make that happen. Good question.
So I'd like to conclude with this one question, which is, what kind of capacity or resources does the Institute for Applied Ecology have for people interested in this kind of work? Do you do consulting, or is it just websites and articles? What kind of support can you provide?
Well, I think at this time it's a lot of websites and articles, but we are working to increase that and increase our resources and ability to consult. We have met with some folks one-on-one. Can be time consuming though for us. And that's, I think, part of the Native Seed Network website and getting that up and running and creating that seed partnership hub that Tom mentioned in the beginning. And that we're hoping to, make that central website available to, provide more information and then maybe do some follow-up one-on-one questions after that.
Yeah, and then also the National Native Seed Conference that's coming up in March is going to be a place for people who are involved in partnerships or are interested in starting them to come and learn more and interact with each other. Good networking opportunity. And
information about that will be coming soon. Again, the dates, it's in Washington, D.C., and the dates are again, Tom?
March 21st to the 27th, I think.
Okay, great. Well, and webinars like this, where you all share such terrific information. So my thanks to you. Thanks to everyone who attended. Thank you for the patience with the chat, but thank you for everybody being nimble and emailing the questions. We really appreciate your time. So Maria, Alexis, Tom, thank you so much. And we hope to see you all again at the Natural Areas Conference in September. And then we have a webinar on the native seed assessment that's been published. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.